Good morning and welcome to our IT Modernization virtual event as part of our infrastructure series. My name is Michael Hoffman and I'm the president of Government CIO Media and Research. Government CIO Media and Research is the leading solutions resource in federal IT. We're extremely excited this morning to invite some of the top experts in IT modernization in both government and industry, talking about different topics focused on IT modernization, such as 5G, cloud solutions, network modernization, agile processes, and human-centered design. And we're especially excited and honored to have Chairman Jerry Connolly join us on the virtual stage, and will be hosted with our Managing Editor, Amy Kluber. Before we kick off, I wanted to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Without their support, this morning and afternoon's event and content wouldn't be possible. Software AG, Dell Technologies, National Government Solutions, and Acquia all played an important role in making this morning and afternoon possible. I also wanted to encourage everyone who's watching from their home offices to take part in the conversation, whether on social media or by providing questions that our moderators will review. So first, please join in the conversation on social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, using the hashtag #DigitalCIO. And if you'd like to ask a question during any of our panels or of any of our speakers, please just input that question in the box below the video player. Our editors will take a look at that and pass them on to our moderators. And with that, let's get started. Let me invite Amy Kluber, our editorial director, to the virtual stage. What she's going to do is introduce the chairman of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, Jerry Connolly. Thanks a lot and enjoy.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us. I am joined here by Chairman Jerry Connolly. He's also a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us to talk about IT modernization trends and issues.
My pleasure, Amy. Thank you.
So, this pandemic, obviously, it was a pretty momentous 2020, which is kind of an understatement. What has it taught us around IT modernization, about the need for modern systems and the importance they have in dealing with agile government?
Yeah, I think the pandemic in many ways has exposed how dependent we actually are on technology to continue to function, and how essential a robust technological infrastructure is to continuity of operations, both for the private and public sectors. So, for example, the previous administration was backsliding quite consciously on telework, and then the pandemic hit, and every federal agency had to stand up widespread telework programs, and some of them were found wanting. Some of them lacked any guidance, some of them lacked any kind of protocols because they had slid on teleworking. And I think we now understand that teleworking, the cultural barriers to telework have collapsed in the light of the pandemic. You can no longer be preoccupied with, if I can't see you, you're not working. That's out the window. And so I think telework, one victory, paid at a very high price, but from the pandemic, is telework is permanent. It's here to stay. It is going to be a cornerstone, feature in our workforce and in our workplace as we move forward. The cultural battle about, do I like telework? Can I trust telework? Do I want to promote it? Is over. The pandemic has done that. But we also know that the lack of modernization in federal IT and in state IT systems is really costing us. So I'll give you some examples. I mean, the E-Trans system at the Small Business Administration. So back in April, in the CARES Act, we pumped $600 billion in SBA loans and converted loans to grants for small business set-asides and some industry set-asides. Now, That was a 30-fold increase over the annual portfolio of SBA normally. So normally they manage over 12 months, $20 billion in loans for small business and other business financing. We, in 1 month, went from 20 billion a year to 600 billion in 1 month. And the E-Trans system, their IT system simply could not handle it. It collapsed multiple times. Access to it was difficult. Some small businesses didn't get the assistance intended. Targets were missed, all because of IT. Not because of lack of good policy, all because of IT. And the IT system was not nimble and agile enough to readily, recalibrate who was eligible, what were the terms and conditions, what kind of documentation would be needed, and what kinds of new financial institutions would qualify for managing these portfolios over and above the usual suspects. So those all had to be programmed in because we had changed the law for the pandemic. The same thing happened right at IRS. So IRS was expected to continue its normal tax filing and processing of tax returns and auditing of tax returns, but it also became a giver. We expected IRS to hand out payment checks to virtually every family in America. And again, with 60 different IT systems, many of them ancient, not all capable of kind of interacting well, the IRS had struggles with that mission. And remember, the mission was get money into the hands of people quickly to stabilize the economy. So don't dawdle. And yet we didn't finish payments to American families that were initiated in April of last year until almost December of this year, of last year. So in some ways, we were thwarted in meeting a lot of goals we set for ourselves to save the economy in the middle of a pandemic because of IT. And one of the great examples, not a federal one, but not unrelated, were state unemployment insurance systems. So at the federal level in the CARES Act, we changed eligibility, we expanded it, we changed the duration of eligibility for unemployment insurance payments. We changed the amount of money, and that had to be programmed by 50 different state IT systems. And we found that states had not invested in their IT systems for unemployment insurance. Some of these systems are ancient legacy systems going back 40 years, and we had collapses. We had people at real risk of food insecurity and eviction or foreclosure because they weren't getting an unemployment benefit they were entitled to under the law we passed in April. And so it was defeating or working counter to the whole purpose of the law. So I know that's a long explanation to your simple question, Amy, but I wanted to give some concrete examples of how integral IT is to the mission, a critical mission in the middle of a pandemic and an economic collapse, and how in some cases the IT systems, because of want of investment, simply couldn't manage the tasks we set for them.
That's certainly a valid point. And in a way, the pandemic, it prompted such renewed interest in IT modernization, though it's always been, it's not a new concept. People have been trying to modernize legacy systems in government for years, but it did get more of, a widespread attention during the pandemic, especially with the additional attention on TMF funding, for example. How do you foresee some of the progress government has made over the past year in this quick pivot? How do you see it sustaining after the pandemic? Are there any roadblocks or what more needs to be done?
I think we still have some missionary work, especially here in Capitol Hill, to educate people about technology is not a commodity to be managed.
Right.
It's not a nice thing to invest in when you got a lot of money left over. It is integral to the mission. If you don't have the IT right, I guarantee you, your mission could be compromised or defeated. And so that's what integral means, right? It's absolutely embedded into the mission. And you need, therefore, to be making the necessary investments to maintain that integral capability and to build on it. And you mentioned the TMF, the Technology Management Fund. It's a good object lesson in what we're talking about. So to their everlasting credit, the Biden transition team in the COVID-19 relief bill they drafted had $10 billion for this category of technology, $9 billion of which would go to the TMF. And I was doing rain dances, hallelujah, you know, I mean, because we only got $25 million as a placeholder from zero in the TMF in the appropriations process here in the House last year. So to have an incoming administration get it about how integral IT was, and they were going to fund it in this $1.9 trillion bill, $10 billion for this purpose, I was happy as a clam. And the House certainly supported it. But it gets to the Senate, and they start fetching about what is this, and this seems ancillary, if not tangential to the mission. It's not really a COVID-19 direct related expense. Who needs it? We already spent plenty in IT, and that TMF fund started to dwindle. We salvaged what we could in the initial round of negotiations with objectors in the Senate, and we kind of had reached an understanding that, okay, how about $6 billion in that range? And we thought we had a deal. And last time I checked, it's been zeroed out. Zero. In a $1.9 trillion bill, not a dime for IT investment. And I've even listened to fellow Democrats who sanctimoniously say, well, we want to do whatever the new president wants. And I remind them, well, why did you make an exception about the TMF? Because he wants that. And I support him. We support him. So you have to ask yourself, how could that happen? If there's an appreciation of the criticality of IT investments as integral to the mission, how could we end up with apparently zero for this category in a $1.9 trillion bill? I mean, at that point, and I'm not trying to disparage it or diminish it, but $9 billion is almost a rounding error, right? In a $1.9 trillion bill. So why are you quibbling over it? Why would you pick on that one of all things to quibble and to object? So that tells me we've got a lot of work to do with members of Congress to still appreciate the centrality of IT to everything we do.
Especially when you're talking about the infrastructure that to even support certain systems and capabilities that IT is enabled by.
That's right.
What types of lessons are you learning from this effort, or what do you think? How do you close that education gap with explaining and demonstrating the importance that infrastructure and continued investment has in the future?
Yeah, what a good question. Let's say, for a lot of members of Congress who don't make this sort of a special item of concern, and everyone has to sort of focus on areas of expertise and concern, and they can't be experts in everything. We need more people to be engaged in the whole subject of federal IT modernization. But for a lot of members who aren't, it's almost counterintuitive that you would need, say, a technology management fund. Because after all, we spend $96 billion a year on IT. And you want more? You need a separate fund to reinvest? And it's hard to explain. Well, look at how it works, though. I mean, if you have a legacy system and you're spending billions of dollars every year to maintain and operate that legacy system, you need to set aside and budget billions of dollars over a multi-year schedule to replace that system. And it's risky. And you got to train people. You got to hire outside firms and experts to help you with this transition to retire one and get up and running a new one. And that's going to be a multi-year effort. It might, if you're the cabinet secretary, it might very well extend far beyond your tenure in office. It's an obligation once started that you don't want to waste money. And maybe it's a priority for you until other demands start to come in the door. So you were going to do it and a pandemic hits. And now you've got all kinds of other expenses and concerns that suddenly, with the best of intentions, this falls down in your list of priorities. And so having a technology management fund, an incentive fund to provide both seed capital and an incentive for you to take that plunge and retire that old system and invest in the new one is actually an essential tool if we're going to move forward. But educating members just about that, because it seems counterintuitive that you need it at all, is just one example of the uphill road we got in educating members.
So as we all know, you have a large presence with FITARA, and it's been certainly effective for IT modernization efforts across government. Do you foresee events over the past year affecting FITARA scorecards or how everyone's thinking about FITARA? Is there anything we can expect in the future scorecard releases?
When I co-authored and got FITARA passed into law, I made a vow that, unlike, say, its predecessor law, Klinger-Cohen, we weren't going to abandon it. We weren't going to sort of move on. We were going to stay with it to make sure it was implemented. And that FITARA is the basic architecture for IT modernization in the federal government. And I'm very pleased with the fact that we've done that, partnering with GAO. We created a scorecard, which I had suggested. We look at 7 or 8 sort of categories. And they range from, data center consolidation to moving to the cloud, to intellectual property management, to even issues like, to whom does the primary CIO report? And our view is, like in the private sector, there should be one primary CIO who ultimately is responsible. In Latin, I call it primus inter pares, the first among equals, because we have a lot of people called CIOs in the federal government, and we didn't move to abolish that, but we moved to evolve to a system, a hierarchical system where there's accountability and responsibility, and that there's one primary person called CIO who has a direct reporting relationship with the boss, and as you would have in the private sector. And so one of the categories is, to whom do you report? To whom does your CIO report? And we don't want people reporting to the deputy assistant widget director in the bowels of the basement, because in a bureaucracy, everyone can see you don't have any power. So your opinion is fascinating, but I don't have to do anything with it. If I report directly to the boss and everyone knows that, you're going to pay a lot more attention to my advice and counsel and direction with respect to IT. And so we think that's a practical thing that has to happen, and we score you on it. So the scorecard, I think, has been a force for good. And what I have been really pleased with is most CIOs I deal with in the federal government actually have embraced FITARA as a really useful tool for them to leverage change, positive change and investment in their respective agencies. And that's the spirit in which we wanted to approach it. So, and we have 2 hearings a year on the scorecard, and we're planning the next one, I think, for April, to give the new administration a little bit of time to find its feet. And so that will be the next one. I think that's our 12th scorecard. And I think it really has actually worked, and it's not a bad model. And the fact that, Congress, in the form of our subcommittee and committee, have stuck with it and not abandoned it and not moved on, I think provides a continuity and a sense of, no, we really mean it. This has to happen. Even though it's not a headline grabbing, sexy kind of issue, it is a fundamental good government issue without which, as I said earlier, missions will be compromised. And a simple example of that, when the Affordable Care Act was rolled out, you will remember, what went wrong? Well, the website for people who enroll crashed catastrophically. And there were all these stories about, oh my God, it means the Affordable Care Act is dead. It's not going to work. They're going to have to start all over because of an IT issue. Because the people focusing on the rollout were focused on getting the policy right and the programs right, but they never paid attention to technology because that wasn't their, expertise. And they saw it as something technical that just somebody, who didn't really wear a coat and tie in the basement got right because he was the geek or she was the geek. And that attitude almost derailed the entire Affordable Care Act. And so it's an object lesson that you would think we don't want to relearn. Again, the FTAR process is designed to help people avoid that kind of problem. So I think it's been transformative, and it's not dramatic, but cumulatively we're building on, I think, progress. And again, I'm very pleased that most CIOs have embraced it for precisely that purpose.
And look at all the changes that kickstarted in technology and government, the whole Affordable Care Act. So,
yeah.
So in these last few seconds, Chairman, there really is no going back to exactly what things were like pre-pandemic, whether that's positive or negative. Where do you see the next big changes happening in IT infrastructure, and what do you hope will be accomplished?
Well, I do have a bill, for example, on FedRAMP that we hope will become law. It almost became law in the last Congress, but for one Neanderthal senator blocking it, I won't name him, but I will call him a Neanderthal because he just killed a really good idea to codify FedRAMP, and which, as you know, is the program that certifies private sector entities to provide cloud services to the federal government. And anyway, we're hoping we can get that done in this new Congress with the new administration. But I also think we have to look at protecting big data that is maintained by the federal government. The solar wind, we still don't know what happened, all of the consequences of the solar wind breach, but we know it's significant and we know it is very damaging. So we have to not only understand that and recover from that, but we then have to create an architecture for cyber hygiene and cyber protection as we move forward, because the sophistication of cyber attacks and probes is only going to grow. And there are lots of people out there of malign intent. So protecting, the data that the federal government has, protecting the intellectual property and national security assets is really more vital than ever, and arguably more vulnerable than ever. I mean, even let's go back to the context of pandemic, there are hundreds of millions of cyber probes and cyber attacks on the CDC, on the FDA, on private sector pharmaceutical companies developing vaccines to steal the intellectual property, to skip the steps and the expenses, and to be able to, steal someone else's hard work. And so we've got to protect assets as we move forward on a broad front. And we also need to develop, capabilities that can actually maybe punch back a little bit for those malign forces that are trying to do harm as part of our protective network. So I would see those as subjects of next concern and legislative attention. Although we're not going to give up in maintaining Qatar and maintaining the progress and building on it as we go forward.
Great. Well, we are out of time, but Chairman Connolly, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, it's great to talk to you about FITARA and some of these efforts in IT. And certainly it's been an interesting year. And I know you have, in the middle of a hearing right now. So I thank you so much for taking a few minutes to
Amy,
talk.
thank you so much for having me. And thanks so much. It was fun.
Thank you.
I don't believe that it's going to be all or nothing. We just have to figure out what the right balance will be.
We really started with a human-centered approach to engaging people on the questions that they had. We wanted to make sure that the questions that they were asking were the best and biggest questions that they could ask and not limited by maybe the perspective they had about the data they thought they could get access to.
So these cloud-based systems really are changing the paradigm for the way that researchers interact with data. But what cloud-based systems offer is the potential to house the data together in the cloud and allow researchers to come do their computation in the cloud. And one of the reasons why this is, I think, potentially a game changer is because it provides the opportunity for reuse of code and replication of results.
So, welcome everybody to the Cloud Solutions to Support Agency Missions panel. Federal agencies are shifting away from legacy IT systems to the cloud, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all model. Some agencies want infrastructure as a code, infrastructure cloud models. Some prefer platforms as a service models, while still others may need software as a service models to meet agency-specific needs. Today, we're going to hear from agency IT leaders about the cloud solutions they're adopting to ensure maximum efficiency while streamlining operations. Please welcome to the panel Beth Capello, Deputy CIO of DHS, Mr. Jeff Chancellor, Principal Systems Engineer, who brings an industry perspective from Software AG, George Linares, CTO, CMS, and Sharon Woods, Executive Director of the Cloud Computing Program Office at DISA. And I'll be moderating the panel. My name's Andrew Underhill, and I'm the VP of Government CIO. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to kick off with a group question to everybody. Maybe we can just take it in turns to answer. Now, starting with you, George, can you discuss what types of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service capabilities you've explored in your agency? And what benefits and disadvantages do you see to each based on your agency mission needs?
So at CMS, we've learned a lot in terms of the cloud sort of power and infrastructure offerings and services they have. It's one environment that it moves so quickly. As everybody probably knows, the cloud releases new services all the time. So CMS is trying to sort of create a balance between the platforms, the infrastructures that takes advantage of, right? Keeping in mind, what is it that the business, the mission of the agency is, and how can we serve that better? From that perspective, we're trying to be as flexible, open, and really try to not go with one direction or the other, but really try to be very thoughtful around what's truly needed in terms of the cloud services, right? Obviously, the cloud paradigm adds a shift, sort of like the the amount of work, right, that the system developers, the system owners sort of inherit, right, in the old paradigm of on-prem, there was an operations data center. They will provide all those different things, services that were around the infrastructure. In a new paradigm, the developers, the system maintainers, and the owners sort of inherit that. So there's a lot of complexity and learning curve in terms of that, right? The benefits are that you have a lot of resiliency. It's quicker. Infrastructure as code has changed how we deploy applications, right? The same code is valid in all the environments. You can deploy much quicker into a production environment. But there is a learning. The larger the portfolio of systems you have in the cloud, the more complexity you have now.
Thank you, George. Beth or Sharon, would you like to go next?
I can jump in. So, as I'm sure you know, Department of Defense is this multi-vendor, multi-cloud environment. And I think with time, as we've started to understand what you get at different layers in that cloud stack, that it's not just cloud, right? You have that infrastructure platform and then software as a service layer. There's more maturity in what do you need? And with that comes what kind of technical competency do you have to operate at those different layers? So if your need is storage, when you look at a combatant command and they have all these wartime records that have to be maintained for decades, just basic cold storage, it can be a game changer. Conversely, especially if you don't have enormous technical talent, but there's just this need for users to be able to communicate, collaborate, a lot of kind of things already done for them. It's where software as a service becomes key, where you're not having to engineer things at the platform and infrastructure layer. You're really able to rely on the vendor's know-how to deliver what you need and continue to keep pace with where the technology is. We're still learning a lot about how to consume at the different layers. And I think an area where there's been a lot of learning is that platform layer of how do you take it up a level from infrastructure. So you want a level of control, especially if you have custom built applications or things that you're developing yourself. But SaaS just doesn't offer the level of control that you need over meeting the requirements. I think that that's an area, and the earlier panelist, George, mentioning infrastructure as code is just a really interesting proposition on how you get the most out of cloud, depending on the area, the level of the stack that you're at.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And we've all heard a lot about Platform One from our colleague Nick Chalon recently. Beth, from your perspective.
So, DHS is I think a really interesting federal agency. Not only are we enormous, right? We're the third largest civilian federal agency, but our mission sets are highly disparate, right? From trade and travel facilitation to law enforcement to responding to natural disasters. And so when I think about the benefits and what we're looking for with cloud adoption, I'm thinking about delivery at the speed of mission, right? And performance and capacity management, and all of those things that improve both our resilience, which I think George mentioned, but critically our responsiveness. And I can think of a couple of sort of pointed examples right now. We've obviously all been managing through the pandemic over the last almost year, which is a little frightening to think about. And there are a number of aspects to that when you think about meeting your mission, right? It's supporting a remote workforce. And obviously, cloud enabled those capabilities in ways that we had not considered in our continuity of operations planning, right? I think that we got very lucky in some ways because we had accelerated cloud adoption for some things like, I think I've talked about in the past in other venues, the email adoption piece, right? And those collaboration tools that were in the cloud allowed DHS to flip from 10,000 users a day working remotely to 70,000 overnight without missing a beat. And that's a very small example of where we found cloud adoption really has supported and enhanced the mission. I think additionally, when you look at mission sets from, say, a CDP to an immigration and customs enforcement, to citizenship and immigration services, there are overlaps between those mission sets or handoffs, and cloud adoption really facilitates that data and information sharing. It makes us, again, more efficient and more effective at serving the mission. So there are a lot of very specific examples I could talk about, but in terms of context of where it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, or the variety of service offerings, within DHS, I think we're using all of them, and it's certainly specific to the mission set. And frankly, we're still going to have on-prem services as well. So I think when you're looking at your overall strategy for cloud adoption, you have to be mindful of meeting the mission first. Thank you.
So thank you, Beth. So you mentioned multiple components there. What is it like coordinating to ensure visibility, consistency, and interoperability across the whole department?
It's an awful lot of fun, and it's great when we get to go up in front of the congressman and talk about our FITARA scores, because the DHS CIO is ultimately responsible for managing the security and the efficiency of IT spend across the department. So when we do have these incredibly disparate mission sets, and our components have their own appropriated dollars that they certainly spend as needed to meet their mission. We have a couple of different mechanisms that we use, but most recently we stood up about a year ago our Network Operations Security Center, which is really bringing together sort of Tier 1 and Tier 2 Network Operations Center and Security Operations Center management options. And one of the tenets of that organization is to have visibility into what's going on down in the component organizations. While the component NOCs are managing their environments, right, including their cloud platforms, we need to have visibility. And so we've put some mechanisms in place, tools and procedures to get enhanced visibility into the platforms. But I do think that's an area for exploration and development and growth, right? We're learning how to do this efficiently and effectively. It's not just managing those platforms in terms of a pure operational, keep it up and running perspective, but also from a security perspective and from an efficiency and effectiveness of IT spend perspective, right? Which are all things that the DHS CIO has got to be concerned about. So I think we've made some progress, really great progress, frankly, this past year, but certainly an area that we're looking to continue to improve and enhance as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. And what role does DevSecOps play in cloud adoption at DHS? And how does DHS think about security in that cloud infrastructure?
So for anybody that's heard me speak about this, at DHS, it's SecDevOps, because we are the Department of Homeland Security and security comes first. And I say that with a big smile, but I'm quite serious about it. There has been a lot of conversation about what's going on in the enterprise right now with the recent breach. But these are things we're concerned about all the time. And we certainly are looking at the best ways to manage our security environment as we go to enhance cloud adoption. And I think we've had a couple of initiatives this past year with Zero Trust, the Zero Trust architecture. I've also had the CTO team working on developing some very specific security target architectures that could then be shared throughout the department. Because one of the things that we have the benefit of with being a very large and disparate organization is there are best practices that are developed within the components. And we've got amazing IT talent across the enterprise. So one of the things that we're doing up at the DHS CIO office is trying to bring together those best practices, specifically in the area of security, and share them throughout the department. And our SecDevOps initiative is focusing on that right now.
Okay, great. That sounds fantastic. Sharing best practices is something that I think we all aspire to, but it's not done very well. History has shown us that. So a question for Beth and George now. Since DHS and CMS both collect a lot of potentially sensitive data, for American citizens and/or immigrants. How does DHS work with cloud providers to ensure that information is protected and private if it's stored on shared service environments?
I guess I can start. I think something the Beth said around DevSecOps or SecDevOps. I mean, security is key, right? One of the initiatives that we're trying to do, which the cloud has sort of afforded us to do, is we're trying to do the automation of those security controls, right? In the past, everything has been very paper driven, and we're finding there's new technologies out there, which we can sort of move security to the very beginning. By securing is checking the configuration, the things that happen at the infrastructure level. And we call that moving that to the left, right? Empower those developers to have access to that security at the very beginning as they develop. Don't wait like through the normal, or we used to do in the authority to operate process before you go to production, you do all these checks. We want to do at the very onset, have those powerful tools in place that are somehow automatically check things, right? And make that part of sort of if the pipeline of building this new system, this new capability, whatever that may be, and is constantly sort of checking for every release. As we know, Agile is sort of throwing that in place now where now deployments happen weekly, every 2 weeks, as based on the need of the business and the changes that happen. So when it comes to data, right, we're trying to sort of incorporate some of the same principles around that. One of the things that also the new technology is allowing us to do is how can we sort of take advantage of the cloud where you store the data once, right? But you can be accessed by multiple parties. In the past, technology was a big constraint for us because you were really constrained to the physical server, the capability, how much CPU, memory, and so forth. In the cloud, you can sort of create each consumer, right? You have their own compute, right? Their own power, CPU power, if you will, and to consume the data as much as they want to based on their need without affecting anybody else that may be next to them. So we are moving in that direction. We just started, we're learning a lot. How can we sort of protect? We have high sensitive data that is considered high. How do we create security around that and put some tools that will allow us to have that fine grain authorization, right? Where the business, the owner of that data can have a say on approving who has access to the data. Because it becomes, as we all know, as federal agencies, we all get audited, and we got to be able to provide a sort of a trail of who accessed data, who requested the data. So having that, freeing the data is great, but we got to have processes and controls in place that can sort of provide that proof and audit so we can show that we are secure, that yes, the data is being used in a context that it is going to serve the business of the agency, right? So those are the couple of things. And
thank you, George. Beth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm probably repeating myself a little bit here, but I mentioned with our SecDevOps campaign that we're starting with some very specific security target architectures. And the Zero Trust initiative that's been underway, I think we've had about 7 specific use cases this past year, because we're taking an incremental approach rather than a big bang theory with Zero Trust. And when I think about securing the data and ensuring privacy, because I think that's really a part of this is the privacy aspects of it. I'm looking at ways that we can leverage the Zero Trust architecture to enhance that environment. Now, I do think there are other security measures with identity management and access control pieces that are going to feed into this, and they're going to be supporting elements. But I think where my head is at right now is going starting from the standpoint of there is no trust, right? And that's sort of fundamentally what Zero Trust is about, and ensuring that we are putting the necessary controls around the data in a way that doesn't get in the way of the operations, but certainly is mindful of the, from mistakes to adversaries that would want to access DHS data, and trust me, there are an awful lot of them, that we are putting all the necessary controls in place to limit that to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Beth. I think it's a good place to bring Sharon back into the conversation if I can. I have a question here for you relating to the security, and it's, how are you handling the different security needs for the different as a service applications that you have?
To be honest, we're still learning about that. So right now, the department and CCPO, we rolled out the CVR environment, right? So that's a separate story, but that was the O365 environment that we rolled out in less than 30 days for the entire department. But what's really happening right now is the transition to the enduring O365 environments that are at the higher security level. So there's the technical implementation of getting that in place. But then, as you said, right, there are these super important security considerations, and we're still learning how to operate in that place. I think one of the key pieces of it is the identity and authentication part. You have to be able to follow a persona across the department. And, we have over 10 O365 tenants that we're in the process of federating right now. So CCPO, one of the things we did was develop a cloud-based centralized identity solution that also achieves authentication, but it's cloud-based. It works in tandem with the department's existing identity solutions, and it's a repository. So the service tenants can go in and pull things down, and they're still able to retain control and decide who's authorized to go in their environment. But you can imagine a situation where you have somebody that's in the Navy and they get deployed to PACOM, and then they go to joint staff, and they get sent around, and that's where we have, one person with 4 different emails, and it's a disaster. How do you achieve end-to-end security in an environment where you may have a significant security issue in one tenant related to a persona that perhaps has been hijacked? And that could very well translate into the other tenants. But if you have no means of tracking the identity, and mapping that, you have no idea that that's the same person, and you have no way, but for like manual data calls to go figure out what's going on there. So some of that is right, and that's the whole, whether it's DevSecOps, SecDevOps, baking that into the front end of let's get that identity and authentication solution there in the beginning and have that be the basis for the federation as more and more users are rolling into productions across the different tenants. And so now you have this powerful capability of tracking personas, and then on top of that, being able to layer on the commercial vendor security tools for analysis, many of which are based on artificial intelligence, and they continue to refine those to make those better and better so that you have this automated ability to look at and identify potential security issues and then dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. So I think that's a chance for Jeff to give an industry perspective now that you've mentioned those commercial tools. But I wanted to ask you what other as a service capabilities are you looking at to support the DoD mission? Because identity and access management is one of the core services, maybe the obvious one to do first. But what other services are you looking at?
Sure. So, there's a number of services, right? And these become these kind of enterprise consumption services, whether you're looking at something like Salesforce, you're looking at different collaboration suites. So of course there's O365. That's certainly not the only one. I think right now the department is, I don't want to say trialing because they're being used at production scale, but they're within disparate pieces of the environment, and probably not too dissimilar from DHS, where you have all the different services and then the DoD components within that. They're testing out different SaaS applications to meet their mission needs. But the reality with the Department of Defense is that there is this stream that cuts across all the services that is consistent. And so you don't need to have, multiple different instantiations of Salesforce to, achieve a particular capability. But we do, because we're learning and the services we're learning at different times. And so the real conundrum with any of the SaaS offerings is how do you deploy that at scale? And maybe that's just a bridge too far for certain things. And you say, okay, this meets the mission of this particular service, and that's good enough. But for certain things, collaboration tools being a key example, that's not good enough. We have to have a joint force. Joint force means communicating across the entire department.
Yeah, thank you. And privacy has always been an issue. I come from the health IT background, and interoperability and privacy don't necessarily go well together. So Jeff, from an industry perspective, in your experience, what are you seeing to to help with interoperability, that challenge. And how are you helping organizations overcoming the security problems that we've been discussing?
One of the things that we hear as a central sort of theme is that the collaboration, the way we collaborate now has had to change, and we have gotten very proficient at sitting here in our home offices and our home suites, having that same sort of feel that we are talking face to face with our team. I feel very comfortable with it now. We all know that Zoom is now a verb, just like Google took over the verbs. But Software AG has been providing interoperability solutions and data integration solutions since the mainframe came online. So we have experience with that integration. And we also take at heart the security needs and the protection of that data as it moves across the enterprise. And certainly our products continue to evolve with the modern cloud-based transformations, as well as moving stuff to the cloud. So our products have to be able to run on that cloud the same way it does on-prem, provide the same security controls and so forth. The other thing that we're doing and helping with our customers is we're providing solutions to help the planning stages and the discussions around what are your intentions and what are your plans. And those discussions have to have access to the requirements for security, as Sharon and Beth and George have alluded to, is that you can't ignore those types of conversations, and you got to have access to that planning data. So we provide platform as a service for planning and strategic planning for all those migrations that are being contemplated, and the ones that are already there, a way to ensure that integration to those cloud-based solutions from a hybrid scenario works just as well. So we've been very active in that, keeping our products up to date and advising our customers with that sort of capabilities.
So thank you, Jeff. I remember Software AG that you were key to one of the big service buses up in Canada and the health exchange system up there years ago. So you guys have done some great things in the past. Future-wise, where do you see the major growth areas going forward?
Well, the data integration space has been prevalent for a while, but now we talk and about these new technologies such as IoT. IoT just brings a whole new realm of data integration from very small types of devices, but millions and millions of devices. And so using our backbone of our web methods integration platform, we've got to be able to move that data securely from all of these devices that are coming up and blend that sort of device collaboration, making sure that they can talk to each other, but also putting that information of to the decision makers' hands of what are we doing with this? Are we capturing too much? Are we capturing just right? How can we scale, adding a lot more devices and so forth. So we're pretty much right there looking at future technologies, making sure that we have opportunities to put those into the conversations and sort of guide the conversations to how to adopt, how to transform, how to move, and leverage all these cloud services. And IoT is just now getting into the mix in mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're experiencing an age now where it's never been easier to adopt new technologies and innovations on scale, right? George, maybe you could talk a little bit about how CMS is working with cloud providers to, develop that relationship with industry and innovators, because it is important to the success of cloud at CMS.
Yes, so industry, obviously, at CMS, we do contract out most of the work. I would say a high percentage, probably in the 90s somewhere. And so industry becomes very important to us, and we try to share as much as we can with them, right? One of the things that it's important, as all these federal agencies have been saying here, is yes, we're multi-cloud, but the interconnectivity between those clouds and the on-prem systems and everything becomes critical, right? So sometimes working with industry, we want them to understand that interoperability, interconnectivity becomes critical, right? Systems can live, whether it's a SaaS, whether it's in one cloud, cloud A, cloud B, government only cloud. That becomes really not as important as being able to connect. Because at the end of the day, I know more likely the other federal agencies are the same way. All of our programs need the data of other programs, right? There is some level of overlapping in terms of, for the mission itself. So being to have that connectivity becomes key. So we do try to sort of share as much with industry. We have a number of forums that we do and try to let them know ahead, right? Because we want to see CMS is going in this direction, whether it's in a storage state, whether it's in a database, whether it's in security, understand. So what we want is really innovation to come in, new ideas. We're trying to be, to the degree that we can, as technology agnostic, right? Especially when it comes to software development. Obviously, when it comes to security monitoring, network, there's some, some things where we are sort of as target software that we're using and implementing. But when it comes to developing, mission sort of related systems, we're trying to be as open as possible. And we find that that approach has worked for us because industry is bringing new ideas and we want that. We don't know everything. We're still learning. I think that's the one word I think has been sort of repeated multiple times, learning. But we're open to that learning. And we're trying to create a culture within our sort of agency to be open to the technologies. And we're learning more and more that sometimes technology itself is not the problem, but it's how do we adapt that within the ecosystem that is already in place to be sure that it's secure, right? And that the business is able to utilize it in a way that it benefits their programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, George. So I'm going to shift topic a little bit and bring Sharon back into the conversation if we can. And talk pandemic. How has the pandemic, changed the way you're operating? How have you managed the sudden shift to cloud? Maybe you can talk to some of the initiatives that you've had to deal with over the last 12 months.
Sure. So, when the pandemic first happened, I think every federal agency had to somehow accommodate a near 100% virtual workforce. I think for the Department of Defense, the other piece of this was preserving military readiness. Also knowing that, those similar circumstances existed. Fundamentally, collaboration just broke in that kind of environment. And so CCPO, with CIO's endorsement, and the services deployed the commercial virtual remote environment. So it's an O365 environment that we designed and deployed in less than 30 days. How did that happen, right? We achieved something in 30 days that oftentimes takes years to do because it mattered. Leadership at the highest level just stood up and said, this has to get done. But it was more than that. They really followed through. One good example is within the first 7 days of starting the effort and standing up the initial tenant, we had pilot users. You know who all those pilot users were? They were SES and general and flag officers that were in there completely eating their own dog food. Now, I will say the number of VIP phone calls we got about, hey, this isn't working. And we had plenty of continuous user feedback that we capitalized on. But it really made a difference. And the other thing, and I think this is still, right, this is a massive cultural adjustment, is implementing authentic agile. MVP, and this was the case with CVR, it hurts. MVP is painful because it doesn't include all the functionality you want. It includes the bare minimum functionality in order to have something that is a starting place. And so it is missing things that you really want. And with CVR, within the context of the pandemic, I think the department was willing to accept that because we had nothing. And then from there, you had this constant feedback. So just the simple user guide on how to get on board was updated every night for probably, maybe 1 to 2 weeks. And under a traditional paradigm, that would have been a failure. That would have been why didn't the team plan this all out enough so that you knew exactly and predicted with your magic ball everything that the user needed? That's not agile. Agile is, let me get something out there that I accept is already not what it needs to be. I'm going to get user feedback, which we were getting every day. And that's why every night we were updating it. We'd send it back out. We'd get more feedback, send it back out. But, we had 3.2 million accounts, and now we have, over 1 million active accounts. So there was no shortage of user feedback. But those lessons, which I think, the department onboarded because of the pandemic, it's really hard to translate that still into other efforts. So even with the enduring O365 solutions, it's really hard to not revert back to, well, we want everything right out of the gate. And it doesn't work like that if you're really getting speed to capability, which, the pandemic showed us that we can achieve speed to capability. We can do something in 30 days that's never been done in the world. It's the largest O365 tenant in the world. But then, enough time passes and it's just really hard to not revert back to that traditional mindset. And so that's just a constant tension there that we continue to push on, because we do have that fresh point of reference with CVR and other capabilities, particularly in the classified sphere, that the department rolled out in order to preserve and maintain force readiness.
I think it's important that what I heard is that, we are adapting to these new ways of doing things, but we got to be able to capture that knowledge, capture those best practices, and have them readily accessible so that we can repeat and learn from them, continue to tweak them, and not have it interrupt our daily lives, but a place to capture that knowledge in a knowledge repository is a key thing for us as here at Software AG.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I think that leads on, to a group question I have is, how do we balance the program needs with technological advancements? And I think, obviously something like the pandemic forces us to do that, but ordinarily, what approaches have we taken? I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I will venture to say, one of the things that the culture, at least from the leadership perspective, right? Because I think Sharon was right. I mean, there has to be that support, right? The leaders of the agency got to be supportive of what's happening, and being as transparent. Because even though, for us, it was the same thing. We have Zoom within the agency. At first it was a little bit. We had already started a pilot, kind of. We just got lucky in that aspect, but it was the same thing, learning curve. Now there was no guides or anything like that. But working with the leadership and sort of, creating this, new environment of, we're trying to share with you what we know, what we have. It's learning. And working with you, we need your support, made a big difference for us. And now it's become really that, that de facto go-to, maybe, Zoom, in changing everything else that we've done, and that we're growing more and more. I think is taking those lessons, right? Because out of sometimes chaos, there's some good things that come out of it, right? So it's like having those leaders that work with you and looking at it from that lens and say, yes, what else can we do? What is the next thing, right? Because at some point, we're going to go back to work. Maybe it'll change. The world has changed, obviously. But how do we sort of keep the level of interaction and engagement or the workforce in the way that whether you're at the building on-prem or you're remote, you can still sort of interact and work in the same way? So what other toolings, collaboration toolings that are needed in order to make that experience that much more engaging becomes important too.
So I just want to jump in with two things. First of all, Sharon, congratulations on what you accomplished. That is just amazing, and getting it done in under the circumstances that you were operating in, just absolutely amazing. And I want to key in on something you said about you had leadership buy-in, and I had to chuckle a lot about the fact that your first user feedback was coming from your VIPs, from your SCSs, and from your, I'm guessing, some flag officers thrown in. Not a population that has opinions on anything, actually. Again, kudos to you. But I think what's really important to grab a hold of out of that is you demonstrated capability, right? And you demonstrated an agile methodology in a way that met an overwhelming event. Now, I think what I think I heard you say was, okay, how do I get that sort of incorporated, that agile methodology and that agile acceptance into normal business practice? And I think that's something we've all been struggling with. I don't know about you, but at least from my perspective, in how you get the procurement officials and acquisition officials to sort of understand Agile, right? And how we do this going forward, it's very different, right? It's a very different model. We're not telling you everything up front. We're gonna kind of make this up as we go along, and that's really uncomfortable for, at least in my experience, folks that are long-term government employees. So I think that's an area for exploration for all of us, right? Is how do we take these things that we managed to accomplish, leveraging this horrible event, right? But then turn that into a benefit long-term in getting our own leadership buy-in for these best practices, whether it's Agile, whether it's SecDevOps, whatever the case may be, and making sure that we can continue that work. But again, I just wanted to say congratulations on your accomplishments. These are really amazing.
I think we see some of the solutions out there from our perspective is that we not only have Zoom, we have Teams, we have GoTo, and what we've found is that the behavior's the same. We might get aggravated with the technologies and so forth, but we as a society are now comfortable in this sort of collaboration mechanism. What we have to do then is now bring the data to the Zoom, to the collaboration easier and with purpose to continue to make decisions, because it's not standing still. Our jobs are not standing still. We have to be mindful of security all the way through, but from our operational heritage, moving operational data throughout the enterprises to now our planning heritage, with helping make better decisions for the future state, including all this transformation and the tools. We're right there offering our solutions. We're right there trying to collaborate with our customers and follow in line with the standards bodies for delivering truly enterprise software.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. Unfortunately, yeah, we are out of time. It was interesting as we were talking. I was thinking, well, should we have an identity and access management system here to make sure that Jeff, you're not a computer-generated image that's talking here, and you are really Jeff, Chancellor. Anyhow, I want to thank everybody for joining this session. It's been great, very insightful, and there's going to be a short introductory video for the next panel.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
everybody.
Andrew.
Yep.
When we talk about the promise of 5G, not only is it faster download speeds and lower latency and enabling all sorts of exciting new things, but at its core, it's looking at a portion of the 5G network, the radio access network, and recognizing that in 5G networks, it's going to be largely defined by software.
Technology, especially digital technology, it evolves so quickly these days. And it helps that the public is much more savvier around technology solutions and due in part to the internet.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that first panel. And thank you, Amy and Chairman Connolly previously for the great discussion leading up to this second panel and final panel for the day for Government CIO's Media and Research IT Modernization webinar. Really excited to bring this panel to you. This second panel is focused on 5G and how data is being brought closer to the edge, connecting more IoT and Internet of Things devices, and reducing response times to fulfill the mission. So we have an exciting 40-minute panel lined up for you with some esteemed members of industry, government, and public sector. We have Scott Bowman, Deputy CIO, FEMA, Mahtab Emdadi, Regional Sales Director, Dell Technology, Keith Nakasone, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Acquisition, Office of IT, GSA, and Dr. Ryan Vega, Chief Officer for Healthcare Innovation and Learning, Veterans Health Administration. And I'm your moderator, Mark Renama, Vice President, Government CIO. Really excited to dive into this discussion today. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So let's just go ahead and dive in, and we'll start with just a general question about considerations that your agency and or organization are looking towards for as it relates to network modernization and 5G. So why don't we start with you, Keith?
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that GSA is doing is, we were among our partner agencies working on the implementation plan for the secure 5G. And one of the activities that we are concentrating on is the acquisition piece. When we look at things from a whole of government approach, we really want to capture all of the requirements and build out those acquisition solutions to accelerate the process of injecting emerging technologies such as 5G into the infrastructure. So a couple of activities that we are focusing on within the implementation plan is the assessment of global competitiveness and the economic vulnerabilities from the United States manufacturers and suppliers perspective. That's in partnership with the other agencies such as DHS, FCC, Department of Commerce, as well as us. So we're looking at the supplier base. And in addition to that, what we're doing is we're looking at how can we accelerate that delivery. So when we look at unclassified, classified IT systems, we're figuring out how to build these acquisition solutions and figuring out that acquisition process so we can move things along a lot quicker. So from a whole of government, best in class acquisition solutions perspective, that's kind of what we're doing from our seat.
Great. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that. That certainly gives some perspective to the upstream of acquiring these technologies. Let's just shift over to you, Dr. Vega. So obviously the role of the Veterans Health Administration has changed a lot with COVID and the pandemic in the last year. Can you share some of the considerations that you and your team are looking at with respect to network modernization 5G?
Yeah, Mark, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. So, I sit much further downstream as a healthcare practitioner and sort of in the healthcare innovation landscape. Our OI&T department is really leading some incredible modernization efforts, both digitally and within our network. From a healthcare standpoint, and particularly, I think this was happening prior to the pandemic, but certainly accelerated as a result of COVID, we're seeing the need for more distributive models and modalities of learning, whether that's training young clinicians or young providers, whether it's engaging with patients more in their home. And the idea that more care, particularly more acute care, is going to be delivered in the home, that more devices are going to be connected, and those devices are going to be telling us things about an individual's health, and in this case, veterans' health, veterans' well-being and wellness, I think is not something that's going to be in the future. It's happening today. And really, what 5G enables us to do, whether it's sort of optimizing the network and slicing, and even some of the capabilities and the advancements that it brings to LTE networks, the notion that you're going to have all of these devices that are operating on different types of frequencies or different types of bandwidth that can now begin to sort of play better together, right, in essence. And what that means now for the patient's own ability to be in the center and the control of their care, as well as for clinicians to better connect. And when I say connect, this isn't just virtually, but really the evolution of physical connection, tactile connection that can actually be made possible by 5G changes the paradigm of what we think of as a physical exam that's encountered virtually. And so I think what we're literally sort of diving into is the use cases that are going to be enabled by this technology, whether it's advanced AR and VR for surgical navigation or patient education or training, and really trying to sort of move the needle forward and begin to embrace, I think, what's happening within the healthcare landscape, which is this shift to more distributive models, both of learning and of care. And who knows what types of innovations we'll see as a result of this type of network capability, but it's certainly exciting to see it unfold.
Thank you, Dr. Vega. Yeah, absolutely. You have to imagine the implications to telehealth are right here in front of us, as you said. Really, really exciting times. So that's really interesting. We got an acquisition perspective. We also got a healthcare perspective. So let's go over to Scott and hear some of a maybe emergency response perspective and the FEMA agency.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited about where industry is headed, where we're all headed. It's amazing as we look back over the years, how far we've come in such a short amount of time. We're in an era where we can go to the data while remaining connected to back-end systems and also make decisions at the edge. And as the data moves to the edge and resides on the edge, the computing and software workloads are also moving to the edge as well. So it enables us to turn things around faster, especially within FEMA. FEMA, we're continuing to improve our disaster response capability as these technologies evolve. When I started at FEMA 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, cellular networks nationwide didn't exist. We didn't have the coverage and speed that we have today. What we have today is amazing compared to what we had back then. So one example of how we've been able to dramatically improve our time frame for assistance to disaster survivors is with our housing inspectors. Back then, 20 years ago, the inspectors had to use dial-up. So they were all analog. They would typically communicate once, maybe twice a day. So the turnaround time for those inspections was measured in days, not hours. Typically, they would communicate at night, get their inspections that they had to do the next day, go out and do those inspections and not communicate again until the following evening. So it was 24 plus hours at best case scenario to get those inspections done. And nowadays, they walk around with handheld tablets that are connected to cellular, and they're able to continuously communicate, sending and receiving before they walk into a house to do an inspection and sending the results immediately after they walk out of the house. So that's, reduced our turnaround time to hours, not days, for those housing inspections, which helps get assistance out to the disaster survivors faster. Another example is our disaster survivor assistance program, where we send staff out to the communities with cellular devices, and they can literally sit there with a disaster applicant and in real time look at the status of their registration. Whereas before, 20 plus years ago, the only option was call up to our call centers and ask for information on the status of your case. Now, that can be done immediately, either our disaster survivor assistance staff, or people can check it on their own via their smartphones. So it's quite a difference from where we used to be. And we're looking forward as we move towards 5G. With more data on the edge, we're considering, those devices and endpoints untrusted. And all the compute actions must be, role-based, immutable, least privileged, so that we ensure that we're protecting that data. And we do so with security in mind, using a risk-based framework and implementing the tenets of Zero Trust. So nothing is trusted, and we must secure that data on the edge. We're not just worried about securing the data back in our data centers today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, that was really beneficial. Thank you for that answer. It's really interesting to think about how quickly technology changes, and looking at that from that perspective of healthcare that Dr. Vega shared with us, and then emergency management. In some way, shape, or form, we're all in the business of facilitating change to rapid technology and adjusting to rapid technology changes. So really, really exciting times. We've got some very unique perspectives from 3 leaders in the government sector. So let's hear from our panelists in the private sector. Mahtab.
First of all, you said my name perfectly. Very impressed. So I am very excited to be here today. I think being on the industry side, we're in a very unique position to see how this data era is impacting our customers across several different customers. So what I've noticed is that the impact of 5G and AI, IoT, it's rippling across a whole organization. It's impacting IT, it's impacting security, it's impacting workforce, digital communities, and it's really bringing IT closer to the mission and the business. From an IT perspective, I've seen a lot of our customers have to go through a major transformation where they were solely relying on, a cloud computing architecture or a data center architecture, where now they have to move to a federated architecture, which it seems like we're always kind of going back and forth from dispersed to consolidated to dispersed. But we're back into the federated distributed world. And I think that that's a move that a lot of our customers have been able to do easier, because most of them do live on the mission edge already. So that's one perspective. Of course, as the architecture grows and expands, security's job gets a lot harder, and the attack vector just grows exponentially. And every single device that's collecting data becomes an attack zone. So I think that security has had to modernize and figure out new ways to mitigate against this new emerging landscape of vulnerability. I think the workforce, especially in this pandemic, has been impacted. Work is something that everyone does mobilely now. I think Dell has officially closed down, I think, goodness, like 30% of our offices permanently. So everyone's expecting to be able to do their job mobilely. They're expecting to be able to consume data fast and being able to compete and differentiate themselves, leveraging data and information. So that really puts a lot of pressure on the developers and the digital community of our customer bases. They are being asked and really demanded by the workforce to incorporate next-gen data architectures and services that take advantage of AI, ML, and are able to take all of this data that we're gathering and turn it into information and insights. So they have to move much faster, and they are leveraging a lot of acceleration technologies in the platform space. So I think the exciting part of this conversation is that this 5G transformation is so pervasive, and it really does impact all customers and almost every organization and line of business of a customer.
Thank you. Thanks, Mahtab. That was very helpful. Yeah, it's interesting. It really an obvious common thread out of everything that was shared was security, right? I mean, bringing data closer to the edge, security has to be of higher concern. And in this era of cybersecurity issues, attacks, vulnerabilities, obviously this is going to be a big focus. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's focus on security a little bit. Keith, you're a self-proclaimed requirements aggregator. I've heard on the GSA side, and obviously I like starting with you and having that unique perspective, because the acquisitions that result from these modern technologies start with you and your office and your team. And so, can you talk a little bit about maybe what you're seeing as far as requirements coming in from different agencies, maybe with a flavor of security and more secure systems?
Sure. Thanks for the question. One of the things that we always have to be concerned about is the security requirements. So as I'll use this as an example, one of the largest enterprise infrastructure solutions, the EIS contract that is the best in class in delivering telecommunications services and solutions we have incorporated all of the security requirements in the contract, but we also have flexibility in the contract at the order level. So if there's additional security requirements that is required by the agencies, we are able to do that effort at the order level. And so what we try to do is when we build out these government-wide acquisition contracts, we try to take things from the whole of government approach. And then when we, the other example I want to provide is the multiple award schedule, where we have the mobility special item number, where we have the telecommunications, IT, and services that allow not only at the federal level, but state and local level as well. Right. So when we look at whole of government and we look at extending our cooperative purchasing program efforts and best practices and requirements, we have to look at it from that whole of government lens. Because when we adopt and we say, how do we inject innovations, technology a lot quicker through the process? If we at the federal level can provide that information down to state and local, we would like to build those acquisition solutions so that they would be able to leverage what we're doing at the federal level as well. So that's one of the beauty of building out these government-wide acquisition solutions with the flexibility. And so that's one thing that we're doing. And, you know, with the National Defense Authorization Act and Section 889, prohibition of telecommunications equipment, et cetera, we can ensure that we have some control points within the entire process of acquiring. And that's exactly what we want to do with the 5G infrastructure as well. So security is always on the top of our minds when we build out acquisition solutions. Excellent.
Excellent, Keith. So Scott, you had brought up the topic of zero trust, immutable infrastructure, infrastructure as code. These are all kind of aspirations for many agencies, many private firms, and people are kind of in different places on their path along this journey. Can you kind of share a little bit more about the other considerations besides just the speed increases and response times of network modernization as it relates to security?
Yeah, and oftentimes the technology is not the issue. It's implementing and leveraging the technology in a secure fashion, and I think that's where a lot of agencies, especially in the government, we don't move as fast as we could because we're following security principles and a risk management framework that is designed for different a different era, a little bit slower technology pace. So we're trying to expedite that, using the risk management framework as we go forward as a solid basis to ensure that everything we do is secured, that we take into account records management, that we take into account privacy, that we also leverage the cybersecurity aspect of it. So for that, we're continually ensuring that the device is authorized. Is the device authorized and still secured? So that's one thing. Device management is critical. Is that not only the data is out on the edge, but that device is on the edge. So ensuring that nothing has been compromised on the device itself, in addition to the more traditional. Is the user authorized? Do they have the right requirement to have access to the data? So we're mixing those things together to ensure that we're not only secured from an authorization perspective from the user, but also that they're operating on a secured device and that we're not letting a compromised device have access to the data that we have. So we're still learning as we go, and it's a continual learning process, I think, for everyone as we go forward. And we're pushing things out to the edge, but we're also working that security piece of it. So as with other government agencies, we are doing it, but we're doing it slowly and in a more secure fashion. Perhaps than some people would like, but again, you cannot have exploitation of that data sitting out there on the edge. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that was. I wonder if we could shift over to Mahtab and get kind of a different perspective. We heard kind of the government side of it, so I'm wondering from a private sector perspective. I know there are some commercial clients and private sector clients that follow risk management framework and RMF. Of course, it's required on the government side. I just wonder if there's so many different considerations as far as private sector versus the things that Scott just laid out.
So I think that the private sector, we grapple with the very similar challenges. I think that those are ubiquitous, across the board. And I think that, aside from needing to modernize the way that you go about zero trust and security, the need for doing completely modernized networks and bringing compute storage closer to the edge where this data is being generated, that's really kind of the part where I'm seeing all of our customers focus their efforts on. I mean, the amount of data that's being generated today, they just can't leverage the hardware-centric network environments that are out there today. They have to move completely to software-defined networks, and the applications out there are requiring sub-millisecond low latency response times that are requiring that compute and storage to be right next to where the data is being collected. So a lot of considerations that I'm seeing our customers going through are making sure that they are going after very secure supply chain and durable compute and storage resources, ruggedized systems, tactical systems. We work a lot with them on similar things like that, cells on wheels, things that you can kind of move around depending on where the data is being generated. So network modernization, going to software designed and software centric networks, and also bringing that compute and storage as close to where the data is being collected is another major consideration.
Thank you. Thanks, Mahtab. And Dr. Vega, I'm most familiar with the Department of Veterans Affairs myself. That's an area I've worked a lot in my career. So I know that, the security, a lot of the security considerations for VA are coming out of OINT, especially as it relates to network modernization. But I wonder, are there considerations for privacy and clinical viewpoint of the security as it relates to network modernization?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is going to be an area, we sort of use this phrase, think slow and act fast, because the technology is rapidly evolving and the patient, they're becoming more consumer driven and sort of deciding how they want to receive their care. And so we have to be able to meet that. And, it gets really, really challenging. And I always tell the story, when I was a resident, we had developed this really nice clinical decision support application, but folks could only use it when they were inside of the hospital because it was streaming patient data. They wanted to be able to be at home, or we had residents that moved back and forth between the VA and the academic affiliate. They wanted to be able to use it on the move. And we just couldn't figure out how to make that secure. And I don't think that's the right answer moving forward, is to say, no, we can't do this, or it's going to have to be an issued device on our network. I think from the clinician standpoint, right, it's about feasibility, practicality, and recognizing that my cell phone today has an enormous amount of data that's actually helpful about my individual behavior. How do we make sense of all of this, integrate it meaningfully into the workflow, allow it to be actionable intelligence for both me and the patient, and do so in a secure fashion? I think this is where real need around interoperability and standards comes into place, because you're not going to have the ability to just have this massively open network of public, of PHI just being out there. And I think Mahtab really sort of isolated sees the attack zones, right? You have this massive distributive network of devices connected to a hospital's network. Each and every one of those are vulnerability points for what we all consider as data I don't want other people having. I think interestingly too, it also plays within the walls of the hospital. How do you optimize the network so that if we have surgeons in the operating room moving MRI data into a holographic image for advanced surgical navigation, that's the same network I want somebody downloading a movie on? I think, we sort of recognize and go, well, so let's take a step back. So I think those considerations, right? It's about, we have to think slow in the sense of, let's be practical and let's make sure that whatever we do does not lock us in to where the ability to utilize this technology prohibits it from being meaningful and integrating into the workflow. More data for docs is not necessarily better. It's more actionable insights, right? And I don't want to rip the log into another system or leave what I'm doing and then go to another computer to say, well, this is the only place you can get the data. So this is where a lot of think the innovation and the research is going to be needed to really embrace the technology in a way that it becomes meaningful and actionable.
Thank you. That's really. I saw you shaking your head a lot, Mahtab. I'm going to come back to you. So, any thoughts on that from a healthcare perspective? Obviously, Dr. Vega is working in essentially the largest, healthcare organization in the country, essentially. And so, I just wonder, as far as Dell's technology is concerned in healthcare, do you have anything to add to Dr. Vega's thoughts?
It's a huge fan of everything that you said, and I agree with you. I think that being very practical and being very pragmatic as you go about bringing in this new technology is extremely important. Avoiding lock-in is critical. I know that a lot of what we're doing at Dell is we're standing up 5G reference architectures that are built on completely virtualized stacks so that no one has to be locked into any one telecom provider. So that if you are leveraging Ericsson today, you can be able to move to Nokia tomorrow. So I think being able to bring in new technology in a way where you're flexible, agile, and you can avoid lock-in is so critical right now, especially as things are moving so fast in the technology industry.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. So Keith, I'm wondering from what you're seeing as the requirements are coming in to acquire these systems and to move. Obviously, you're getting a wide variety, as we can see as we're hearing from emergency response view and healthcare view, you're getting a wide variety of requirements for the need of the technology. The thought occurred, and I just wondered, do you guys, are there other considerations besides all the requirements coming in from the agencies? Do you look to private sector, commercial, or anything like that to kind of make sure it's a holistic acquisition strategy, if you will?
Right. That's a great question, because I was just going to go there with the private and public engagement that we're having around the 5G, right? So on the NTIA website where the implementation plan was dropped, that was the whole reason of the engagement, because private and public engagement is so important, so we can find out what are the constraints, what are those unique requirements. And this is if we take the agile approach and we phase things in by use cases, we'll be able to learn a lot quicker. We can adopt a lot quicker because we can do these sprints a long time. So if we build the acquisition solutions in and around those use cases and those challenges that the agencies are having, we're able to grapple with exactly the specific mission requirements that each agency is trying to resolve. But there's also other things that are being lifted to the enterprise level, meaning that if we find consistency across everybody is doing it, then we can build it into the acquisition process. That will help accelerate the process, refine requirements, but also adapt to those best practices. But those early engagement and collaboration with the partners on who's delivering that capability is very key to the process, right? Because if we can identify those conflicts or those challenges early on in the process, we're able to work through those. And we know that some of the telecommunication companies are standing up some labs. We know some system integrators as well are standing up labs. So if we learn through those use cases, we'll be able to work through those nuances and deliver capability through the acquisition solutions a lot quicker.
Great. Keith, that's really exciting. It's good to hear that combining the best of all worlds really gives confidence that it's a solid acquisition strategy to serve all the federal agencies very well. So this next question I'm going to throw out there, and anyone can kind of just step up if they have some comments or thoughts. There's a notion that increasing the speeds and getting more access and bringing the data closer to the edge might prompt agencies or organizations to put data closer to the edge that they previously haven't put closer to the edge. So this could obviously raise a number of different challenges. We talked about security a little bit, but I just wonder specifically about the desire to maybe put more data, more sensitive data closer to the edge because of network speeds increasing, and what considerations and impacts that might have. Anybody interested in fielding that one?
I'm happy to throw in a couple of thoughts. I think that the missions are going to require it, right? I think it makes security uncomfortable, and I think that they're going to have to find ways to mitigate around it. But with the amount of data that's going to be captured at the edge, there's just no way with even software-defined modern networks to traverse all of that into a core repository. So I think that a lot of applications and next-gen data applications are very smart around what they send to a core. For example, I have a video surveillance system in my house right now to watch my cat when I go away. It doesn't send me anything until it notices something moving around, right? And when that happens, it sends that data to the cloud so that I can look at it, or similarly, if an organization has the same system, so that they can analyze it. But if you are trying to consistently stream all of that data that sensors are collecting, there's just no way to keep up with it. So you have to take on some risk and just know that that's what the mission will now require, with volumes of data growing as fast as it is.
Great, thanks, Mahtab. Dr. Vega, any clinical considerations?
Yeah, absolutely. for me, I think of it, it'd be the equivalent, if we don't move in this direction, right? It'd be equivalent of your Apple Watch or your Fitbit saying it's going to track the calories, but then not actually telling you how many calories you burned. So what, right? I mean, so I think it becomes really important for us to do two things in the clinical realm. Understand what data is meaningful, and then simultaneously, how do we convert that into something that's actionable and intelligent, right? So that the patient can be at the center of the decision-making if it's being pushed to them, or the clinician, or, you know, the family, whatever it may be, the caregivers or whatnot. But there's going to be so much of this that is going to be produced outside of the walls of the hospital. I mean, I think this is coming, right? I mean, we were seeing it today, but, you know, what we're going to be able to do over the next decade that doesn't rely on being on the walls of the hospital means that this type of sensitive data has to exist where the patient is. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to do so in a meaningful way. And I go back to that practical, you know, the practicality of it. But it's like, the Fitbit. If it tells me it's going to track my calories and just says you burn calories, that's not very helpful, right? So I think, you know, we're going to have to sort of continue to push that envelope. It's going to be absolutely necessary, particularly in healthcare.
Thanks for that analogy on the Fitbit. Definitely something folks can relate to. Scott, how about you?
I'd say the data, obviously, you know, residing on the edge, we have to secure it, and it's critical that we do so in a manner that doesn't allow it to be exfiltrated or anything like that. But it's also about the decision making and how do you act on that data? What do you do with that data? And can we push some of that decision making, you know, like we were talking about earlier, AI and those types of things, to the edge to take action on the data as it resides in the edge, not just having the data on the edge, but making determinations and decisions based on the data at the edge versus having to send it back to a centralized repository or centralized system for that decision making. So I'm excited about what can be done in that aspect, especially if we can have those things happen, you know, on the devices. We mentioned earlier, the devices are very powerful today compared to what they used to be. So there's a lot more capability there. And I just see that whole, you know, we talked about centralized, decentralized. I see, you know, the push for the decentralization and those things, you know, not just data, but also decision-making being pushed to the edge as well. Thanks, Mark.
That's great, Scott. Yeah, really something to consider as far as not just the data coming to the edge. I really appreciated that answer. And thank you so much, everybody, for a really great conversation and panel this afternoon. It was really wonderful to get the perspectives from both the federal healthcare realm, emergency management, acquisition, and the private sector. Really a great panel. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Dr. Vega. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mahtab. We're really excited to bring this event to folks and excited to see where 5G takes us over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Across the federal government, especially at GSA, our customers are demanding that newer technology at a faster pace. They're not going to wait 2 or 3 years anymore.
And so when you have combatant commanders saying DevSecOps is critical to my mission, and you have the corporate structure saying, oh my goodness, you just showed me $500 million a year in platform costs, you know, the rest of the story kind of writes itself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. The federal IT modernization successes rely heavily on being user-friendly and streamlining the agency mission. Some federal agencies are turning to DevSecOps, agile processes, and human-centered design to shape their IT infrastructure. In this panel, some of the tech-savviest federal agencies and industry members will share their secrets for IT modernization. I'd like to welcome our panel here today. We have Andrew Kahn, the COO of National Government Services. Welcome. Keith Johnson, the Contracts Officer for NITAC. Sabrina Parker, the DIDIT Program Manager at USCIS. And James Putney, the Executive Director for DHS US Digital Services. Welcome, everyone. Agile methodology, as you know, is flexible and collaborative. It focuses on our customers and our citizens. It encourages flexibility. This ability to be responsive to change is a critical success factor for our panel. And today, responsiveness to this change, using agility, and delivering with the customer and citizen stakeholder in mind are essential. We want to kick off our panel by talking about the journey that our panel members have experienced to successfully incorporate agile and human-centered design into their respective organizations. Let's start with James and hear a little bit about his journey from USDS.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, USDS is kind of, brought in to help a lot of the different, kind of programs and groups across DHS. And so, DHS is a very large agency. So there isn't like, I guess kind of one kind of journey for DHS. All the different kind of components and groups are at kind of different stages. So you have some groups like Sabrina's DITA group that have, advanced quite a ways on the agile journey, and others that are kind of just starting. So, kind of, often it's, really going in and just trying to understand the current mindset that the team and those kind of around the project have. What are they looking to do? Are they trying to work in an agile manner? And, kind of really just, kind of, pushing and working to speed up that feedback loop. That's the real advantage of agile is, getting the feedback from the users quicker, figuring out if you're on the right path or not and being able to adjust, earlier.
That engagement with the end users is really part of the art of human-centered design and agile. And so, even as a practitioner, learning how to engage with the stakeholders, I think is a great part of that. Sabrina, why don't you share a little bit about your journey and your team?
Hey, good afternoon. So the journey for me started off at a different program at USCIS, where we brought in human-centered design and agile. They, trained a lot of business owners or users on how to be product owners, and we took on the task of learning like a whole new language. Is how a lot of us saw it at the time. To figure out like how to communicate in this new agile space and how to be agile and all that good stuff. And it was very, very exciting for our team. Luckily, when I moved over to the DITA team, the concept of agile had really matured at the agency by then, and a lot of our delivery teams were using those best practices, and the business owners were coming along really well at USCIS. We have product owner training that's conducted by OIT, and so we have the ability for anyone who's going to take on a product owner role to learn, more about agile, to learn like the best practices and all the terminology. And so we kind of laid down this infrastructure at the agency where we could catch the business up to speed pretty quickly on what it means to be supported by one of these agile delivery teams. And then on the OIT side, agile took off really quickly, and with the support of all our contract partners, I think it's been quite successful and matured pretty fast.
I like how you mentioned that it's taken off quickly, because I think people who are delivering in this way really enjoy it. They like to connect with the stakeholders that they're working with and the citizen stakeholders, and so it makes it a fun part of the job to deliver in an interesting way. Let's get an industry perspective on the journey from Andrew. Why don't you share a little bit about NGS and your journey there with agile and human-centered design?
Sure. Well, thanks, Erin, and a pleasure to be here today. National Government Services is a federal contractor that has been serving agencies within HHS for the past 50 years. And for us, about our journey over the last several years, HCD really is really not an option anymore. It's really kind of been a requirement for us, and we're really committed to an agile management culture and having that proven playbook that our teams use to adapt, change, and respond. And really for us, it's around focusing on our clients' goals, prioritizing what mission enhancements that we're looking to do that ultimately, to your point, Aaron, is maximizing the stakeholder satisfaction. And one of the biggest things that we've seen, probably most significantly, is really it's around a shift of our culture within the organization. And by introducing agile methodologies, HCD, we've really seen that collaboration that Sabrina talked about as well, between the business functions, our IT operations, and really the teams that lead to cost savings, speed to market, and just overall organizational growth. So it's not really so much about the technology as it's really about people and how to get the right people and the right input to build our solutions.
The culture is clearly at the heart of a lot of these applications, and more than textbook. And for all of us as leaders within our organizations, in order to make those visions a reality, we require the contract piece, right? In order to tie everything up. And so, it's great that we have that contract perspective. And I think it'd be great for Keith to share a little bit about that from the NITAC perspective, because we have to really work hand in hand with the contracts team to make that culture part of our contract and vision.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, excuse me, thank you for having me. So at NITAC, we have worked hard to create a customer-centric experience, and clearly it's something that we don't take for granted. When an agency or customer does business with NITAC, they will quickly find out that we are a customer-centric organization. We've geared our operations around the needs of our customers. So whether they're beginning a solicitation or they need help with research for a particular requirement, they want to see what was done before in the government or what other folks are doing in the government. Whether they're placing a task order or delivery order, NITAC is committed to getting the answers to them. And the reason why we're in this position is because we have an open door. We've created this collaborative environment where we have, incrementally or iteratively built upon our successes and built a pretty good organization. So our customer support is really at the heart of how we do or why we do what we do, and really the definition of, I guess, an agile approach. So collaboration is very, very important to us.
That's fantastic. And it's, really the key to making the vision become a reality. Sabrina, let's talk a little bit about your vision for Did It Too. I mean, some of your goals are to support the delivery of innovative solutions and drive the mission outcomes through best practices like HCD and lean product management, continuous delivery. Would you discuss how you hope this to look like for USCIS?
Sure. So this to me looks a lot like the partnership that we currently have on our mobile first contract. So we have integrated teams that includes our design, development, product managers, usually in a lead role. The teams are also a shared responsibility between federal workers and contractors. So one thing that is a little unique about maybe USCIS, but especially our program, is that we do have federal engineers, designers, and product managers on board. We have this HCD process, the human-centered design process, that is pretty hopefully standard. It involves problem discovery, identifying the pain points, then followed by solution framing. And then from there, we agree on like a solution for the top priorities with our product owners who represent the business. We talk through like high business value items and prioritization together. And then during the design and development phase, we just expect our teams to practice continuous integration and delivery, also to deploy as often as possible. We have a team within our team that manages infrastructure for a lot of our applications. So, that includes, the Jenkins pipelines and AWS environments and things like that. So it's a large task. It's a big program, but it's not a new setting or scenario for us at USCIS. And our program leads have a really good sense of what success looks like for this partnership. And I think the key is that it is a true partnership between our contract partners and the federal team members.
Thank you. Andrew, with COVID-19 and health IT in the federal space really being at the forefront of a lot of our minds, would you share an example of how NGS has applied Agile to improve federal health IT programs and some of the positive results that you're seeing in this very challenging time?
Sure. Sure. So for us, just as I mentioned, the common theme, Agile, is bringing alignment within our organization and that cultural shift we talked about. And for one of our largest programs that we support, we leveraged our scaled Agile framework to coordinate the work of our 11 Agile development teams. And really, this required a high level of collaboration, communication, and transparency. Some challenge through as we work through the COVID environment, but continuing to make sure that we kind of remove those organizational silos that we work from. And one of those examples that we had is we support a electronic data interchange for health claims on our program, which accepts about 200 million claims per year. So a big part of supporting that system and making enhancements to that system, which ultimately that's a system used by providers throughout the country, healthcare providers throughout the country, is around a regression testing. So we applied a safe methodology to implement our regression testing, and what it did require, we were able to implement a new process. Saves about 75% of the time that it previously took to do regression testing and documentation. So really a big win for us, and the systems testing is just critical to make sure that we don't have impact to our providers and our customers, ultimately Medicare beneficiaries.
Great to see Agile really working towards the mission and improving efficiencies and cost savings and reducing fraud, waste, and abuse. One important topic is to understand how Agile is influencing IT modernization in other parts of the organization and other parts of the IT environments. And so James, at DHS, with their Agile journey, how has it impacted IT modernizations? And, there's been a big focus of migrating to the cloud at DHS. And so it would be really interesting to hear how the development side is impacting the IT modernization side and some of the support structures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think with the DHS, kind of the goal with Agile is getting that, quicker feedback loop, kind of quicker delivery. And so one of the challenges, I've been at DHS just over 4 years now. When it first came, it took about 6 months for us to get a server to, set up a site that we wanted to use. Obviously, you can't get a very quick feedback loop with that. So I think, the kind of Agile and cloud have gone side by side. That, kind of Agile's increasing the feedback loop on the production side, but then with the cloud capabilities, it's like you actually get that out to the customers and then users much quicker. It allows the easier kind of testing, being able to do the kind of canary deploys and things like that, where you can roll out changes to a small group, and then if something's wrong, quickly kind of pull them back. So it lets you have that kind of faster movement and speed. So I think kind of as DHS has moved forward on that kind of Agile journey, they've started seeing those advantages of the cloud can bring as well. Initially, I'd say the cloud adoption was more of a kind of lift and shift of like, okay, we'll just take this on-premises, system, and then we're going to move it up to the cloud. Sure. But they weren't really taking advantage of what the cloud, could offer and do.
Having also been in IT quite a while, I love seeing how Agile starts to break down some of those stovepipes between cyber teams, infrastructure teams, development teams, and thinking about the product and the mission. And so it's great to see those teams come together more and collaborate more and start to learn from each other. So Keith, we're on the cusp of a very important time for you. Thank you for being here today, because I'm sure you have a lot also going on. So as many people know, NITAC is on the cusp of releasing CIOSP4, and it's designed to be more agile and iterative. And so, as a leader on CIOSP3 and taking on leadership roles on CIOSP4, would you share with us how you built off of CIOSP3 in the new vehicle, and how that emphasis on the customer that you mentioned has impacted how NITAC has thought about the vehicle and positioned the requirements and the vision that you guys have.
Sure. So yes, it's very busy. We were actually a little surprised how popular the CLSP4 requirement is, but our approach to SP3 really kind of answers this question. I mean, though we are very pleased with how well SP3 and the SP3 small business has done, from a financial standpoint and also from an order standpoint, we still felt that obviously there are opportunities to improve. There are areas to improve upon. And first, we took a high level look, or we took a high level look at the whole 2GWAC concept and 2GWAC approach. And we've came to the realization that there were certain areas that could use some help, right? For one, at a high level, with the 2GWAC approach, there's an increased administrative burden, not only on the government, NITAC, and the NITAC customer, but also on the contract holder. So, and we also noticed that the current vehicle structure related to the small businesses, it prohibited small businesses the opportunity to compete on all requirements. So therefore, with SP4, we kind of changed our approach. We like to think we improved upon it. We're still going through our approvals, so that remains to be seen if it was improved upon. But our customers seem to love it. We love it. So therefore, we hope that it's approved. So with the SP4, obviously we want to build upon the successes of SP3. SP4 mitigates the challenges that government and industry face while administering these GWACs. Industry having multiple contracts under one GWAC, having to submit deliverables for each of those contracts. That can be a bit time consuming. Same thing from the NITAC side and even on down to the customer. So we've listened to the community, the stakeholders, and we've come up with an approach that we think will make everyone happy and then make the GWAC more streamlined and more effective in its approach.
I really appreciate how the way that you're describing your human-centered design from a contract perspective, that I think it's unique that you're looking at the offerers as well as the customers. So your view of a customer is very well-rounded in the usability of the contract from both perspectives, which I think is really cool. Especially as everyone's trying to deliver quickly and give the best products and meet the contractual requirements. So kudos to that. Sabrina, when we talk about DHS, it's a very mature, agile organization. You're not in the very start of your journey. You have a tuned process, and USCIS was really one of the pioneers around DevSecOps and agile for the government. So I think we're curious, how do you build on that? You have a lot of success, you're delivering well, you're using these new tools and technologies, you're breaking down these stovepipes, you're focused on your customers. So what is success in the coming year? What are some goals for your team?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, where do you go from here? But I don't think we see ourselves as at the finish line in any way. For our program specifically, I'd like to see some of our teams and our stakeholders mature in their understanding, their shared understanding of agile methodologies, both why we use them and why we should be using them. I think that is a common problem probably in a lot of areas, but definitely at USCIS. In general, our teams really want to focus on our solutions, and we want our business owners to bring us their problems or just bring us their users, and we'll have a way to extract those problems and come together to identify what to solve. But sometimes the HCD process is not completely understood, and there's a fear factor that we are going to go out and do user interviews and come back and just start, building things that our product owners might not want or approve of right away. And so we have a lot of conversations about, why we want to follow the process and why it's very useful, and also just building trust in that process. So I think there's still work to be done to make sure that both sides of I guess the relationship understand why we use human-centered design the way that we do. I think from the DevSecOps perspective, we look to just get all of our development teams at the same level of maturity. So sometimes it's based on the customer, sometimes it's based on the technology that you're using. But the idea is that we want everyone releasing as frequently as possible, and what we have are just like uneven metrics right now. So we plan to kind of dig in deeper in some of those metrics that we have for deployments and some of the best practices in that area, and just make sure that we're leveraging all of the infrastructure and pipelines that we already have in place here at the agency.
The tools that DevSecOps and continuous integration deliver on really afford themselves to those metrics and that visibility. And so, I think it's exciting to see, as those manual processes are reduced, a lot more insight and ability, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, that you get to see problems, sometimes real time. And so being able to address those and measure those is definitely a really important step in maturity once your teams are operating and using those tools. So that's a great step forward, I think. Andrew, from an industry perspective, how are partners like NGS partnering with the federal government to evolve more methods and deliver more human-centered design? And like you said earlier, it becomes part of your DNA of how you deliver. And so, what are some changes that you have seen, and how have you positioned to make that change in your delivery team and your culture?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think from what we're seeing more and more is our federal partners are continuing to embrace HCD and Agile, and for us, we've seen it really around continuing to make sure we're listening to the customer, whether it's the healthcare provider, the clinician, the beneficiary, and listening to those wants and needs and really adapting. One of the things that we've worked with our federal partners, agency partners, is really around customer journey mappings, also user research, and just continuing to make sure that we have that perspective as we go forward with things like our single point of entry for healthcare providers, for our website, as well as our portal is customer facing. And it's really important for us to continue to leverage portfolio management that really aligns with that strategy and execution, lean portfolio and product management that really helps us around making sure that we're hitting the value versus just project. And it has, I think I continue to push on. It's been a cultural transformation for us, and just the ability to share and show our teams and customers that incremental feedback, the ROI, ultimately making providers happy, customers happy. It's really done wonders for our team morale. And it's just really, again, I think is the theme that comes through is just having the customer and the human at the center. We feel we're building the right products, we're getting the right feedback through the entire process. So it's really making sure we deliver the right thing at the right time.
I love how you say that the teams are energized by it, right? Because I think bringing this modern culture and modern delivery approaches into federal space really brings a good energy. People connect with the mission. And, a good tie-in on the contract side, Keith, is, this whole process, we're looking towards staying focused on the mission, right? And delivering towards the mission. And even from a contract perspective, with CIOSP4, your team has cut down on a lot of the requirements, but still stayed focused on the mission of what you're trying to deliver with your tiered approach. And it is very agile. So can you share some of the best practices from NITAC and how you have lessons that you've learned to become quicker and bring that efficiency, but not lose the important contract components that are essential to the federal acquisition process?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we've employed this tiered approach to our evaluation. So what we've learned by leveraging tools such as self-scoring sheets or the self-scoring process that we've clearly borrowed from other agencies is that we, in a sense, we put the offeror, the bidder, I guess you could say, in the driver's seat of the process, and they get to tell us how good they are and how well they're doing. And really, ultimately, the self-scoring process is a means to streamline or to get to an award quicker, right? That's the biggest gripe with federal procurement, is that it takes too long, particularly with IT goods and services, because by the time you get to an award, the IT service that you wanted is obsolete. So that's really the point of this. We're trying to move much, much faster to an award. And, you know, protests and things of that nature, they'll come. That's part of the process. But really getting to the award faster was the impetus behind employing the self-scoring sheet. Another lesson that we've learned is the number of pages that are often required for these types of acquisitions. We took an honest, hard look. We analyzed, what we've done in the past, and we came to the conclusion that, well, are all these pages necessary? And of course, we've gotten feedback from the community, from industry, of course, telling us this is too much, especially small businesses. And we feel their pain. We understand that, it can be expensive when drafting a proposal with, you have to have 150 pages. So we looked at things of that nature, and came to the conclusion that, what we're doing with SP4, what we've done with SP3, is that we're really just establishing an umbrella. We're just building an umbrella, right, for future competition. So it may be, appropriate to reduce the number of requirements or the number of pages having to do with those requirements. Now, of course, some things are ironclad, but there is room for improvement. There is room for streamlining, and we've certainly done so with the SP4 requirement, and we hope that we're successful. We're confident that we will be.
It ultimately leads to the best sourced, solution for the customer when you can focus on what's most important and, get rid of some of the noise and focus on the mission. Reminds me also, so for James, a question I had that ties really nicely into that approach. And one of the things I love most about Agile are these cross-functional teams, right? And so we kind of get rid of this idea that I'm only in this role and you're all, I'm a tester, I'm a developer, I'm a cloud, expert. And so, those cross-functional teams really bring the best of what the team can offer and allow that communication. But sometimes there's challenges with that. And so I'm wondering what challenges that you faced and how your USDS team overcomes those when you have teams that are multifaceted.
Yeah, I completely agree on the kind of benefits of the cross-functional teams. And I'd say that's partially, part of the answer, to that. There was one program that we went into, it had 7 different contract companies, and they were all, kind of siloed with the dev team, the testing team, the data team, the business analysts. It was just a lot of finger pointing of like, well, no, it didn't get done because this group or that group. And so what we did is actually said like, okay, there is no more this group or that group. You have the cross-functional team with, with at least one person from each of those groups, and you're responsible for building out this, piece of functionality. I'm not going to say like it instantly fixed everything, but over a couple of months, like those teams started like really gelling and took ownership, and there's no longer the finger pointing of blaming, because it's like the person you'd be pointing the finger to is the one sitting next to you. It's much harder to be like, oh, it was Joe's fault, versus just some anonymous group that messed up. So I think that's kind of just forming those teams and then giving them kind of the empowering them to have that ownership, that they're responsible for, kind of completing it.
I'm curious if with COVID, has that communication been harder or maybe even easier because people are spending more effort and time ensuring that communication is happening?
Yeah, it's both. It's definitely harder because you don't get those kind of just, off the cuff conversations, or, happen to look at, somebody else's monitor and be like, wait, like, what are you doing here? That's not how I thought it was supposed to be. But I think people have also realized that. So like I've noticed a more intentional focus on kind of communicating and documenting and things like that, in the past, wouldn't get done because they kind of, come up in those just kind of more random conversations. So I think it is a challenge, but, the teams are being kind of more focused on it now than they were in person.
For other people on the panel, any comments that you want to share about some of the communications challenges or successes?
Yeah, I'll add, Aaron. I think that the pandemic definitely has made us just pivot, and you talk about being more agile. I think the value that James talks about, the face-to-face, the conversations that you have, maybe as you're on break, or it just I think really you lose that. But I think you do get that focused attention, and at the teams, my teams, I think we continue to make sure it's working and get what we need to do.
So we have time for one more question. I want to have a chance to ask all of you, and it has to do with, what technologies or initiatives are you most looking forward to still this year? And, we'd love to hear what you're excited about and what you're working on in terms of either a new solution for RPA or AI, or maybe just a process. And so, Keith, we got to start with you because survey says.
Oh boy. Well, in terms of initiatives, obviously SP4 and the release and competition of SP4 is certainly on our minds and in our faces every day. So we're certainly looking forward to that, and we really are committed to providing a valuable product to our customers, and also a place for contract holders to demonstrate and compete for work and really show what they have and what they can offer to the government. And also we're looking forward to helping agencies meet their goals, be it category management or socioeconomic goals. And just one last thing, I know we talk a lot about SP4 and we're laser focused on SP4, but CIO SP3 is still a good contract. It still exists. It's still a viable contract. We have a products contract as well as CS, named CS. So I just wanted to leave with that note. SP4 is coming, but CIO SP3 is still here. It's still a good contract. And we also have CIO CS.
Oh, I think that's, thank you. I think that's great. Sabrina, tell us what you're looking forward to in the next year.
Being with immigration, we kind of have the pleasure of having our business needs broadcasted in the nightly news and the newspapers. So there's a lot of exciting changes going on in our space, and you kind of never know what's going to get thrown at you. So that's kind of the most exciting part of being agile in the immigration world. I'm looking forward to seeing you just in general how the new administration's goals for immigration and all their new policies really just changes our business needs. It's going to give us a lot of new problems to solve. And I think our teams are definitely going to rise to the occasion. Right, currently, we're all of a sudden, because of COVID, we were looking at video interviews, and we have teams trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we virtually interview people? Those type of things are going to continue to come at us. And also there's a big effort to digitize a lot of the forms and processes that are involved in seeking benefits. And I think that's going to be some exciting work as well. So those are a few of the things that I'm looking forward to.
That's great. Andrew, industry's facing a lot this year.
Yeah, I think a couple things that that we see, just RPAs, robotic process automation, continue to have great success there. Some low code systems continuing to follow that path. And then for us, I think it's really around data intelligence and how we can incorporate that into providing better solutions using data for our customers, and we're seeing that probably a big need there from our healthcare customers, but just better insights, patterns, change, trends. It's obviously top of mind with the pandemic as well. And then finally, I think we're seeing, I think as James talked about, just continued push towards cloud enablement and being a part of that, and just allowing our environment to become more and more flexible as the business changes.
It's fantastic. James?
Yeah, so mine's probably actually a bit of a combination of Sabrina's and Andrew's. As Sabrina mentioned, a lot of exciting, things within DHS on the immigration side, but also, FEMA on the disaster assistance and CBP on the customs and everything. But I think what I'm excited about is, kind of using the data, as Andrew was mentioning, but kind of really focusing on measuring the mission impact. So, as we are making these changes, system changes, but also, kind of policy changes that are reflected in the systems, like, what's the actual impact that it's having? Are we accomplishing the goals that we were setting out to do? Looking how we can better measure and track that to make better decisions moving forward.
I just want to say that, each of you is tackling a very tough mission right now. And I think it was really interesting to hear from some of the health space and the delivery on the vendor side, contract side, and DHS. It's you guys are tackling really important missions right now. And I agree with Sabrina. It's what's next and how do you deal with it? We're becoming resilient. We're using these agile principles. And I love how human-centered design is kind of leaking into everything we do and how we think about the mission. And as technologists and as leaders and contracts professionals, it's thinking about the human on the other side is such an important part of it, and not just from a developer perspective, but from everything we do. So you guys represented really nicely to share that, and I thank you. Thanks for being with us today, and I believe we're the last panel, so I'll be turning it over to Mike Hoffman to wrap things up. Thank you, everyone, very much.
All right, thank you very much, Erin, and thank you to all the speakers this morning and afternoon. I learned a lot throughout on IT modernization, on a number of subjects, and it's exciting to see what IT modernization and the effect that it's starting to really have throughout government agencies, and it's equally exciting to see what the future holds there and the service that everyone in this country is going to be able to benefit from each of those agencies. So that is a wrap for today. I do want to conclude by thanking our sponsors, Software AG, Dell Technologies, National Government Services, as well as Acquia. Thank you very much for your support this morning. Again, we couldn't do these events without the support of our sponsors. So I truly thank them, and hopefully you got to learn more from some of the executives that they had join us and take part in the conversations today. I also wanted to mention that our next event is going to be on March 11th. It's our first AI event of the year, so we're really excited. It's really coming out with a bang with a keynote from not only Congresswoman Haley Stevens, but also the JAIC director, Lieutenant General Michael Groen. We're excited to have a whole list of excellent AI experts, both in government and industry, take part, as well as there's an expert from MIT as well, who's going to join us and share some of the discoveries that they had. So make sure you're registering for that and get a chance to check out our entire list of events throughout the year. Coming up, we have some really exciting speakers and some great content for everyone. So until then, thank you very much and look forward to seeing everyone soon.